In this series, we're looking at how the spiritual path needs to evolve to keep up with our changing world and also with the spiritual and evolutionary needs of contemporary seekers. And I think a great place to start would be for me to just ask you, what have you learned about what makes for an authentic, contemporary, transformative path? What are the essential ingredients you put together that make integral life practice a genuinely new and effective path to transformation?
Well, there are a number of different directions to approach that question from, and it might be helpful, because not everyone even knows what ILP is to summarize that and maybe the history of how it's evolved, and then to answer your question more directly.
Great.
When we got together and began to teach integral life practice, we actually located ourselves in the tradition of Mike Murphy and George Leonard's integral transformative practice. We regarded what we were doing as a further evolution of the experiment they began. And their experiment essentially drew from the years of seminars at Esalen and the fact that everybody came down after their mind-blowing, life-changing experiences and was untransformed unless they lived a whole life of transformative practice. So the ITP form focused on a physical practice, which they called a kata, a community practice of staying current, and had a big emphasis on affirmation practices that focused on cultivating extraordinary abilities along the lines of some of the things that Mike talked about in his dialogue with you, the siddhis, the extraordinary capacities of the human body-mind that can be documented in scientific terms in contemporary times. That's what Mike's specialty is, but which are replete in the lore of the ancient traditions. People with extraordinary memory, people with extraordinary physical capacity, people with extraordinary meditative capacity. And when we looked at it, we felt we had a different interest, a different emphasis to our focus. We really were interested in the evolution of a higher consciousness that it wasn't really so much about extraordinary capacities, but of a higher responsibility, a capacity to meet this complex and challenging world more fully, in a way inspired by the implications of the often quoted line by Albert Einstein that the problems we face today can't be solved at the level of consciousness that created them. What would it be for us to bring ourselves to a level of consciousness adequate to the amazingly fast-changing and complexifying and I would say threatened and out of balance world that we're all living in? How can we participate in a way that's both fulfilling for us as individuals and effective in terms of making a positive contribution and helping humanity turn some important corners that we're facing? What would it be to do a practice that would have a relevance not just to our own growth, our own self-fulfillment, but to render us contributors to something bigger than ourselves? Our focus really was more on levels of consciousness, both in terms of waking up from the dream and in terms of participating in the dream in a more adequate way, understanding the relative world and participating in it, armed by an intuition of our freedom from the dream, but also fully willing to enter into the blood and guts and complexity and heartbreaking ambiguity of the challenges we face in everyday life. So the form that we forged initially focused on the personal practice, even though all of life is practice if it's understood rightly. The whole matter of being alive is participating in what is often called the school of life, learning to play, you might even call it the game of life, to wake up out of the smaller games into the biggest frame of this larger game we're all involved in. We wanted to give people something that was a little less philosophical and a little more concrete, and so we gave it a very discrete form, which had to do with practices, doing things in categories, which we called modules, so that we were cultivating that ongoing life of practice that you don't have to come down from. And most practitioners have some form of spiritual practice, some form of physical practice, some form of mental or intellectual inquiry, and not everyone does shadow work, but we all wish our friends did, don't we? and so those four categories, body, mind, spirit, and shadow, became the organizing principle for you might call it ILP 1.0.